Could you talk a little bit about how you see that value-based conversation going with the customer, and what are some of the maybe the tips of how to have a productive conversation when you're first trying to move the conversation away from last year's fee plus scope increases plus a bit of inflation to actually a more value-based conversation?
You can think about it as you want to build a dream home for you and your family, and you go to a contractor and say, build my dream home. And the contractor looks at you and goes, what's your definition of a dream home? Is it a McMansion? Is it a ranch style house? Is it on a lake? That's why we have architects. And in the value conversation, you're the architect. You're trying to figure out, how does the family live? Do they entertain? Do they have people over? Do they have people coming in and out? Some architects, I understand, will live with the family to see where they spend most time in the house. Are they in their rooms? Are they in the living room? Do they eat meals together? All of these things play a big part. So in other words, that's just another way of saying we need to start with scope of value first, because scope of value is what determines the scope of work. If all I want is my lawn mowed, I'd buy the outputs. But if I want best curbside appeal, I'll buy the outcome, right? So you need to have that value conversation about what is it you're trying to achieve? How can we help you? What's your desired future state? What crossroads do you find yourself in at this point? What types of decisions do you have to make in the next 6 months? These are more business open-ended questions that maybe won't mean anything to the auditors and may not even impact what the auditors are doing, but might impact somebody else in the firm, like in the advisory group or the consulting group or the tech group. I mean, if their big concern is cybersecurity, well, if you have a tech group, now we can come in and do a cybersecurity assessment or a mini assessment. At least we'll know to put that in the 3 options somewhere. And they can see that and go, oh, okay, they asked us about that. And now they're offering us a way to solve that issue or deal with that issue. And that's all focused on value. We have to be like the doctor taking the medical history. It's not the time to talk about price. It's the time to talk about what's your desired future state, and think about how can we help them get there? How can we guide that transformation? And I'll tell you, I just think it changes the nature of the relationship with the customer and puts the focus on the outcomes, not so much the inputs. And then, especially if you have a team doing that, where if 2 or 3 people go out and talk to the customer, I promise you, they're all going to pick up different things and different signals. And when they come back and meet and talk about, well, he mentioned that they need this help and this, and they'll think of very creative ways to help solve some of the customer's issues. So that's the value conversation, and that needs to take place before you get to pricing, before you talk about scope or anything. Have that value conversation, and then go back, meet, craft your 3 options specifically for that customer, and then go back out and have enough. I think it should be face to face when you present that proposal, if it's an existing customer, because I think when you slide across a 1-page 3 option, proposal, and the customer sitting there reading it for the first time, you're going to learn a lot just from their body language. I promise you. When we can't meet with them in person, we'll get them on a Zoom, and then we'll email the proposal to them, and they'll open it up and they'll sit there and read it. And I'll just watch them on Zoom reading the proposal, and they'll sit there and go, and they're looking 3 what am I losing? What am I gaining? You just learn a lot of things about that, and that will make you a better pricer going forward.
I was thinking about, well, who should be attending this? Because maybe the traditional way that this was done would be the audit partner trots out, goes and speaks to the client, talks about, well, do you want pretty much the same as last year? We've got audit, we've got tax, etc. And we kind of go with the assumption of the knowledge of the scope. We go with some ideas around how we might want to vary that scope. And we might even be pushing those 2 conversations together almost to say, well, I'm kind of walking in assuming I know what we really want here. And so I'm going to be putting forward either in that meeting or shortly afterwards my fee proposal. Mm-hmm. And what we're clearly doing here is we're breaking that into 2. We're making it very distinct. The meeting that is to gather the requirements, if you want to use that terminology, or understand exactly what value is it the client is wanting from us. And to that, we might want different people attending that, multiple people attending that. You talked about the value council. Maybe it's, yes, we've got the partner who is ultimately the relationship partner, and they've had this client for many years, but they want a bit of help from somebody who's on the value council, somebody from different service lines who might be able to add a different perspective here. Either a service that they're already buying or something they're not buying in the advisory space that we think is relevant to clients in this particular industry. And we're going there and gathering that. Then we're coming back to the office and we're regrouping and we're coming up with what those 3 different options might look like. And we're liaising with the value council to get their objective input, the ones who haven't been involved in that conversation, for us to really work quite hard, by the sounds of it, Ron, on what are those 3 options that we're going to put forward. What are the line items from the things that we know we could deliver? What have we found a reason that would give value to this client to make it relevant? Because I think if you're just pitching your menu of wares in the 3 boxes, you've really missed the point, because it should be highly tailored. Every single one of these should be different for every client.
Bingo.
A lot of work going into that. And then what you're saying is then that is taken back probably by the same people that were involved in the first conversation, Ron. Is that typically how you would see it play out?
Yep. Or maybe just 2. If there was 3, maybe you'd only have 2 go back. Maybe you'd only have the relationship guy go back. Maybe sometimes we just had the value council guy go back and actually slide the pricing. That's going to vary depending on the client and the relationship and all those factors that you really have to think about.
But I think the key thing is being deliberate about that, because again, because of the diversity we're naturally going to have in a partner group, one partner might be, well, look, it was great you guys came along to the first meeting, but and now we've got ourselves all agreed on what the plan is from here, but I'm more than happy going and speaking to the client about the 3 options and taking it from here.
Right.
And from that, you're going to get a real valuable osmosis of that partner's going to get better and better every single time they go through this process, and going to very quickly draw all of that expertise from the passionate people who've got all of this pricing knowledge. And then on the other end of the scale, you've got the partner who has now just basically handed this problem over to somebody else because they were in the first meeting for the client relationship aspect of that. They've nicely introduced this other person who's now going to take the lead on pricing. And when it comes to the second conversation to pitch the pricing and to present the pricing more correctly to that client, the relationship partner has somewhat distanced themselves from pricing without kind of it feeling awkward. It feels quite natural. But I think, just thinking that through, Ron, that probably gives you some flexibility to adjust to the partner. I love the analogy of the Goldilocks pricing, but ultimately the 3 options, right? This is the biggest shift here, is how do we move from single price, take it or leave it, or let's haggle over it, to the 3 box options, which is based on value, which is based on what we've learned from what you want from us this year. And I say this year because that will evolve each year. You will not have the same 3 boxes for the same client even next year, because it should change. What are some of the things that you see as being the ways to create optionality across those 3 boxes? Because some people might be thinking an audit is an audit, a tax return is a tax return. How am I going to create 3 different versions of this thing? I think there's probably an infinite number of ways that you could approach those things. But how do you maybe frame that when you're trying to get people to think about the variables across the 3 boxes, Ron?
We think about, I think I call this the 7T model, 7 T's model. It's pretty easy to take any service that a CPA firm does, whether it's a tax return or an audit or CAS, especially when you combine them all. It's even easier, I think. The ways to differentiate 3 options comes down to basically 7 T's. One is timing. When is the client going to get their stuff? Now, you might have different timing for the audit and the tax the monthly close, when is the consulting project going to be completed, those types of things. If you're installing tech, when do we go live, those types of things. But turnaround time, customers are used to paying more for speedy delivery, right? FedEx and the Concorde, if you move faster, you usually can command a higher price. If they're willing to wait, like I am with my landscaper, well, then I probably got a better price because he's out here during his slow time. But if I would have said, hey, I'm selling in 3 months, I'm sure I would have got a completely different price. So timing. The other one, some firms use this, is talent. Who is going to be assigned on the engagement? Now, sometimes this is done more in advertising agencies when people want specific people to work on their account, maybe because they won awards or they're Don Draper, if you're a Madman fan. But I have seen talent, hey, at this price, you get to communicate with our managers, but not the partners, those types of distinctions.
Continuity could be another good one in audit, where clients often demand the same people are coming year after year, and that can get quite challenging when those people are progressing through the firm. So I think it's definitely relevant.
Yep, that we've seen that. Payment terms, you should distinguish every option with different payment terms. The cheaper the price, the faster the firm gets paid. So the cheapest price is sometimes 100% upfront. The middle price could be 25% down or 50% down, 50% at some milestone or some date or when we're done. And then the top option could be monthly or even better, structured around their cash flow because we probably know it. And if we know their cash flow and we know they're broke in the summer, okay, then maybe some of the summer months are zero. As long as they clear it within a year, we can build in the cost of capital to the pricing. So that's another thing. Technology, what technology are you using? And are you giving access to the customer? There could be portals, there could be certain apps, and maybe to access those things, they have to be in the middle tier. Sometimes the top tier, if it's something really special, like some type of proprietary system. I know we did a lot of nonprofits and we had very, very proprietary systems to track some of the, how they have different funds and different grants and they have to spend it in certain ways. And we had very detailed systems to track all that, but that was only made available to certain tiers in our pricing package. And then another one is tailoring. How are we going to deliver our work? Are we going to do board meetings? If so, how often are we going to present to the board? Monthly, bi-monthly, whatever it might be. Do you want to have more face-to-face meetings? Is Zoom okay? It could be a remote client in another country or state. Then how often are we going to meet? And is that something that's important to the customer? Another one is we call it transference because education doesn't start with a T, but if you offer educational programs, a lot of firms do webinars or even live events, and they even bring in outside speakers, maybe lawyers, insurance people, whatever is particularly relevant to the industry that they're working in. At the bottom tier, maybe they have to pay full board to attend those things. If they're in the middle tier, maybe they get a 50% preferred price. And if they're in the top tier, send as many as you want and bring colleagues, bring a friend, So there's that. And then the last one is people always ask me, what about travel expenses and out-of-pocket expenses? Please, please, please bundle those into your price because I don't want the customer focusing on expenses that they don't care about. Just build it in. If your team has to travel to the site to do the audit, build it in. Build in the airfare, the hotels. Just build it in and just include it. Because if you charge that separately, it's kind of like an airline that says, "Oh, we use computerized navigation and auto land. Here's an extra $100 bill." Just hate that.
I think as well as these 7 T's, and maybe it's just zeroing in on one of those more around tailoring, if you like. But let's take, for example, an area like in an audit, I could test controls, and that would be valuable to my client because I'd probably find a lot of things in those controls. But that might not actually be the most efficient way for me to get to the output. It might be quicker for me to do as little as I possibly can over controls, and do more substantive testing. And the details of this is not entirely relevant. The point is more, there is optionality there in terms of how I get to the answer. And historically, the decision of which path to take was based on what's going to take the fewest number of hours.
Right.
If you change the thought process to what does the client value, that might change some of those decisions as to what is the most effective audit approach. And so I think personally, there's a lot of variables in the way that the audit can be executed, that if you've truly understood what the client values from the audit process, I say, whether it's these 7 T's plus this, or whether this is just clicking into that, how do we tailor the way that we perform the work here? It feels like there's a lot of variables there that we could play with, Ron, if we're getting really good at this, to start to actually think about the way that we're approaching the whole service delivery, and where we're mapping out what are the different things that we could do but we don't have to do. Because I think, if you've got to do something to be able to deliver a compliant audit, well, that's not an optionality. That needs to be in all 3 boxes, right?
Right.
But as soon as it becomes something that is not a regulatory requirement, it becomes is it better to do it like that or to do it like this? And so I think I've heard you talk about some exercises you've done around the smile curve and some other things where you've really been challenging firms to think about the valuable things that they can deliver to clients. Am I thinking along the right lines here? And is this something that you would advocate that firms really think about, maybe at a service line level, to be able to really better articulate the value of the work that they're doing?
Absolutely. I mean, there's, and like you said, and it's a really good point. It's very Peter Drucker knowledge worker point. No 2 auditors are going to approach an audit the same way. Just like no 2 surgeons will approach a surgery the same way. But the only way to tell if a surgeon's done a good surgery is to have another surgeon judge it. So that's why we have the review process that we do and all of that. So that's a great point, because you're right. The client is going to value more things around the audit. And some clients are going to value those things more than others, like maybe the management letter or testing controls or whatever it might be. There's also a ton of things that we could do even after the audit is delivered in terms of follow-up KPIs. What should our dashboard be? How do we, are we paying our people enough? Maybe do a salary survey or an executive comp survey, or I know nonprofits have all sorts of rules about how much business income they're allowed in terms of versus, the funding for their mission. And maybe we can test some of those things. I mean, there's just so much that we can do. And it all goes back to the value conversation. We've got to be the architect or the doctor, taking the family history and figuring out what's really important, especially if we're talking to the CFO, because CFOs and CEOs tend to be more future driven. What are your concerns about the future? What crossroads are you at? What kind of decisions do you have to make within 6 months? Maybe Mark, I can come back and we can get right into the value curve, and I can show you how firms are using that as a way to think about all the services that they provide, because we're like fish in water. We don't know we're wet. We do all these wonderful things, but we've never really kind of broken it down. And when you really break it down, you realize some of these things are really, really valuable to the customer. Some of them could take place before the audit. Some of them could take place after the audit. The audit is actually, I hate to say this, and I'm only going to say this, relative value is lower than some of the other things on the side of the smile that we could be doing.
There's a couple of points there that I think that you emphasize in the 8-step process that I think are really important and are probably big opportunities for improvement, particularly in the audits that I'm seeing and that we're working with around. You talk about proper project management, scope creep and change orders, and then the after action report at the end, the kind of the real debrief and understanding of that. And maybe we can think about those 3 things in the interest of time as as one group of activities, if you like, because I think they're all heavily interrelated. But I think that project management is generally one of the weaker areas of delivering an audit process. We're expecting people who have very little training in project management to be very strong project managers.
Yes.
And because of the nature of the way that fees are typically agreed and the difference between the senior people negotiating the fees in the traditional ways and the people actually delivering the work day to day, a lot of that scope creep gets lost or gets left far too late, or it's far too subjective, etc. And it's very difficult to think about whether it's a change order, whether it's a scope creep, whether it's a overbilling or overruns, I hear as a term that really doesn't help us too much on some of those negotiations. What do you recommend to firms when they're moving to more value-based pricing? How do they up their game in some of these areas, and why are they so important?
Yeah, project management, we're terrible at it. When accounting firms talk about project management, they're talking about Sally looking at last year's budget in terms of hours. How many hours should I spend on AR or whatever it is I'm auditing? And that's terrible because project managers draw a big distinction between estimated effort and duration. So if I have, and I'm going to use a tax example because it's easier, but if I give you a tax file, Mark, and say, do this tax return, I believe it should take you about a day. Now, I could say 8 hours, I could say 10 hours, whatever. Let's just say 8 hours. Now, the project manager is not going to lose sleep if you spend 10 hours on that or 6 hours. If you spend 20 hours on that, he's going to want to know, okay, why did it take you so long? You never done it before? Was there something in there? Did you have to go back and bother the customer for more information? Or maybe you spent an hour doing it. Holy crap, you found a way to automate it. What did you do so we can share that across the firm? Timesheets don't tell you any of that, by the way. Only an after action review will get that information. But the project manager is not losing sleep over his estimated effort. He's not even comparing it to actual. What he's losing sleep over is the duration. I said we need to have this by Friday, and you didn't get it to me until the following Tuesday. Or why did something that we thought should take roughly a day sit in the firm for 3 weeks before the customer got it? That's what's keeping the project manager awake at night. And those are bottlenecks. And just like in bottles, the neck is at the top, right? It's usually the partner. He's got all the reviews lined up on his desk and just hasn't gotten to it, or whatever the bottlenecks are. That's going to set the whole cadence of the workflow in the firm. And that's what the project managers are concerned about, because they have to project capacity into the future. It does them no good to look at the past. That's like timing your cookies with your smoke alarm. But by the time you see something on the timesheet, it's by definition no longer manageable. You have to project capacity going forward. That's why they estimate the effort, but they give you a deadline, which gives you a little cushion. Maybe he said 8 hours, but you know what? It took 12, so it took me a day and a half. But if the deadline was a week out and you didn't get it back until 2 weeks, or the customer didn't get it for 2 or 3 weeks, we've got a problem. And that's what the project managers are doing. That's real project management. It's projecting capacity into the future, not looking backwards.
Project management currently often sits on an audit manager's plate. It's just part of the portfolio approach. Is there an element here of centralizing project management, or is it more about introducing project management experts as new hires, or is it about training the existing people who are doing project management to have stronger skill sets in these areas?
I've seen all of the above. Some firms do have a team of project managers that are willing to work on any project because they don't care what it is. These people don't know anything about audits, but they know about how to take a job, bust it into its various parts, assign those parts, put deadlines on those parts, and then track it. Because as you know, Mark, geez, if your budget is 1,000 hours on an audit and you get to 900 in the WIP report, does that mean you're 90% done? Probably not, right? Because what do they say? The last 10% take 50% of the time, or whatever. I mean, it's crazy. But if you bust it down to logical issues, well, how many issues have been completed on or before the assigned due date? That's more of a predictive indicator. If we've got 70 issues out of 100 that have been done on or before the assigned due date, then we probably have a 70% chance of this audit coming in on time. That's a much more valid predictive indicator than looking at your timesheet in arrears. And so I have seen firms train the team on project management. I've seen them use project managers. Of course, now most of them have workflow systems, Canvas, and there's a ton out there. Friday, Monday is another one. Basecamp. I mean, there's a lot of them. So many of them, though, are time-based. They're not deadline-based. Now, they're getting better. Some of them are allowing you to put in deadline and ignore all the time. You can still put in estimated effort. So I'd be able to call up your work funnel and say, oh, Mark's booked out for the next 60 hours. Now, that's based on estimated effort. Now, accountants, when you estimate something like a budget, they always want to compare it to actual. You don't need to do that. What you need to do is track the on-time percentage of the team member for the tasks that you give them, just like we track on-time FedEx. I don't care how long it sits in their trucks and they're sorting. I care it plops on my porch by 8:30. And that's what they measure.
What are your thoughts, Ron, on how project management and the seventh step of this, the scope creep and change orders piece, how do they interplay, and how do you see firms getting those particular aspects right when we're obviously very nervous and focused on the client experience for some of these areas?
The overarching goal of project management is to strengthen the relationship with the customer. And I would have never, ever thought about that. I thought about is how do we manage our work and get our stuff done and make sure we're up to quality standards on our side and all of. No, it's all about the customer. It enhances the customer experience. So, and the other point I want to make about project management is no matter how you price, whether it's hourly, whether it's value, whether you're in a subscription model, project management is essential because it just is how the work moves through the firm. Who's going to do it? Do we have the talent to do it? Do we have the capacity to do it? Can we meet our deadlines? The really good firms will put a deadline on themselves and they'll tell the client, like FedEx does, your package will arrive by 8:30. That's important. I mean, even Domino's now, you can go online, order a pizza, and you can see it tracked from when they put it in,
It's been one of the things that's always surprised me over the years of what we do, Ron, because, there's an element in our platform around assigning work to individuals, setting deadlines and tracking the status of that work. And it's a two-way aspect where it's within the accounting firm for them to do their audit work, but it's also got visibility to the client in terms of the things that are needed from the client. And I've had so many emails, phone calls over the years from accounting firms who were completely and utterly surprised at how much the client valued the fact that they could see how things were progressing, and they had much greater transparency over where the work was, what was needed from them, etc. And your point really emphasizes that, and I've probably not appreciated that enough either. Of this project management area is important for the client relationship, the client experience, the client value add, if you want to call it that, way more potentially than the efficiency opportunity that it gives us on the accounting firm side. Because to your point, right, if you can add more value to the top line, i.e. charge 1% more for your fees, that has a way bigger impact on your profit number at the end of the year than saving 1% of the time on the audit.
Absolutely. It's a great point. I mean, this is why Fred Smith at FedEx did his tracking system. And he did it pre-internet, so he gave a bunch of computers to his best customers. I think he used the 20/80 rule and said, look, you can log into this, to our servers, and you can see exactly where your package is. And investors had a fit. They said, you spent $1 billion on this, and it doesn't increase the delivery time by 1 minute. And he said, I didn't do it to increase efficiency. I did it to have stronger relationships with my customers and create an excuseless culture inside of FedEx. My people can no longer BS their customers about where their packages are because the customers can see it too. And I thought, oh my God, the difference between an accountant and an entrepreneur.
Let's round out the conversation then. What would you share in terms of practical advice around handling change orders, managing that particular aspect of the process, and the bit that you've touched on a number of times here, and I really want to make sure we delve a bit deeper onto the after action report as well. So how have you seen those implemented well, Ron, and what would be your recommendations to firms looking to bring in this 8-step process?
This with project management, it's really important to know when you're outside of scope. And there's, a couple ways that can be discovered. Usually it's our team members at the coalface doing the work that says, oh, wow, the client didn't do this. They were supposed to get us these reports. They didn't. Or maybe something came in that nobody knew anything about, and now we have to have a gap ruling or whatever it might be, some complex issue. That's obviously scope creep. And the people at the coalface are going to have to back off and call the manager or call the partner and say, hey, we have an issue. Now, they do this in auto mechanic shops. You deal with the service manager, the mechanic goes out there, he's replacing the brakes, and he sees that you need new valves. Well, he's not going to fix the valves. He's going to go back to the service manager and say, hey, they need valves. They're going to give you a price. They're going to call the customer, and the customer gets to make the decision. This is the brilliance of the change order. It maintains the pricing leverage of the seller. After all, the mechanics got your car up on the rack, torn apart, but yet it keeps the customer in the driver's seat about the decision. Because I might be one of those weird customers, no, close it up. My brother-in-law is going to fix my valves. But 99% say, go ahead, fix the valves after you give them the price. Same type of thing here. We need to train the people at the coalface to back off, because there's a second thing that's talked about less than scope creep, but I think it's more dangerous, and that's scope seep. That's when the person at the coalface looks at something and goes, well, that's not right, and fixes it. It'd be like the mechanic oh, look, the valves don't balance, and they fix the valves. That is scope seep, which is adding value that the customer doesn't know about and didn't approve. And I think that's more dangerous than scope creep. We can kind of price for scope creep. We can take care of some of it, little stuff. If it's something big, like customers being audited or something, well, then no, that's obviously going to require a change order. But scope seep scares me more than scope creep. It's when our team is out there being perfectionists and doing things that they probably shouldn't be doing.
So should we be looping back to the people who originally agreed the 3-box concept and involving them in this change order process or this additional fees?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to give you a terrible answer. It depends. Some firms get to the point where they allow the team members to do the change orders and even price them. And sometimes, I'm telling you, the team are really aggressive pricers. So it's something I don't shy away from. If the team wants to, do a change order and put a price on it, I'm willing to experiment with that to see, because then maybe they'll be sitting on the value council when they become a manager or partner or whatever. So there's that. It depends on the nature. I kind of tend to think about scope creep in terms of t-shirt sizes. Is it small? Is it medium? Is it large? If it's small, maybe we've built in enough room in the especially if they pick the top tier, probably not going to push it. I'll let the client know, hey, this is out of scope, or you didn't do these 5 things. We handled it. Don't worry about it. If they're in the bottom tier, probably not going to do that. Probably going to hit them with a change order. So there's a lot of judgment here. But it could even go back to the relationship partner, because even if they're a crappy pricer, you're not going to screw up too bad on a change order unless it's an extra large or a large.
So after action reports then. So is this, firstly, is this something that we do after every single, like on every single client each cycle year, I would expect, Ron, if we're thinking about audits?
AARs are usually internal first. You've got to bring that into the culture, because it changes the nature of the work. When the Army instituted AARs in the post-Vietnam era in the United States, it changed the culture, but it took them 20 years. It really, because a lot of people were against it. The colonels thought it would cause insubordination in the ranks, that you'd have a corporal questioning a 4-star general or something. But it's not that. It's not a blame game. It's a learning tool. And it's a very disciplined process. So there's two types of after action reviews. The one in the 8-step process that we're working through is the pricing after action review. That's where the pricers who price the engagement get together. And I think there's 20 questions in my pricing after action review that they go through. Did we price this right? Did we leave money on the table? Could we have priced it better? Should we have used a different type of pricing method? What is the customer's price sensitivity after the engagement as opposed to before? Were we the white knights? Did we solve something really big so we can use that as a way to increase the price moving forward because they love us now? Or all those types of things are looked at from a pricing lens. Now, the pricers could talk to the people who worked on the engagement about some of those things as well, but it's more focused on the pricing. The second type of after action review, which I think firms need to do, is more to capture the knowledge that was gained from the engagement. So this is when the auditors meet, the whole team that worked on that audit would get together, and they would ask 4 simple questions. What were the objectives of this engagement? What actually happened? Because there's usually a gap between our plan and reality. What did Mike Tyson say? Everybody's got a strategy until they're punched in the face.
Yeah.
And then what were the negative and positive effects of that gap between objective and reality, and how could we do it better next time? And those 4 questions are very structured. We have a detailed agenda that we put people through. Ed and I created it, and it should take no more than 40, 50 minutes. And those are recorded now with iPhones. It's really easy. You can video them. You can get transcripts of them and then post them to the firm's knowledge bank or a blog or somewhere where they can be accessed. So when you do assign a new auditor to go out and audit some maybe specialized area, you can tell them, before you go out and do that, go read these 3 after action reviews. And then when they go out to do that, they're going to be more efficient, but more importantly, they're going to be more effective, because you're going to be sitting around talking about, yeah, the checklist said to do this, but I had to do this first, and I had to look at that, and I had to test this. You're going to pick up all that tacit knowledge that's not in the manual or the checklist. And that knowledge is really valuable, because that's our invisible balance sheet. I would only caution, because I know what a struggle and a challenge it is to get firms to adopt after action reviews internally. I would say get it squared away internally first before you bring it out to the client. But if you get there, and some firms have, I'll tell you, having an after action review with the client is more valuable than the NPS score and all that other junk, because it's granular information. It's that tacit knowledge. Wow, you guys came in and you disrupted this and that. I mean, you're going to get, and not as a blame game, but as a learning tool to improve, because it's all focused on the future. And it actually improves future performance. We learn by doing and then stepping back and reflecting. And the reason CPA firms don't do after action reviews is because they're non-billable. No, Ron, just finish up the audit and move on to the next one. Don't step back and reflect on what you've done. Well, if you act with no reflection, that's thoughtlessness. But if you reflect on what you did, that's learning that lasts.
And that brings us full circle, because that mindset is all about the time. And if we're focused on time-based billing, we worry about the non-chargeable hour. And if we focus on value, we worry about investing time to be able to improve the value that we want going forward. So I think that's a lovely way to end the conversation, where we brought it all the way back to the mindset around time and the mindset around value.
I love it.
Ron,
Thanks for doing that. I love it.
I've loved every part of this conversation. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everybody who's watched has learned a lot as well. Ron, you have shared an incredible amount of your expertise here, and I am incredibly grateful for what you've shared here today. And I'm sure there's the people who take this and implement any level of what we've discussed will be able to achieve some really big positive gains. So thank you, Ron.